I suppose you can hear me now. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world and which time zone. In this session, we'll talk about Gatsby and Drupal again. It won't be as specific presentation as the previous one. It will be more like a bird's eye view over the landscape populated by Gatsby and Drupal. You obviously know a lot about Drupal. For those who don't know Gatsby, I'll provide some introduction. And we'll look at how tightly these two actually couple. First of all, my name is Thomas Philip. I have a Drupal web shop at vasilando.be. With my other hat, I'm an architect at the Flemish government here in Belgium. I've been with Drupal since 2006. You may know me by the screen name Vasilando. Very open source and fanatical about sustainable architecture and performance. I was born in Czechoslovakia. I live in Belgium, so basically I'm a European beast. What's the plan for the next 19 minutes? We've covered the speaker and on the planning. I'll explain what the aims of this presentation are. I'll introduce Gatsby as a member of the Jamstack family. I'll talk about complementarity of Gatsby with Drupal. That's the core of the presentation. Some personal experience, pros and cons of the two. If we have time, there's an imaginary discussion with a devil's advocate. Summary in one slide. There are some web resources which you can look at later, and questions are always welcome during the presentation or later. So the aims, this is what I want you to believe. Drupal is no longer a stranger to decoupled architecture. We all know that there are so many front-end frameworks available. Gatsby is just one of them, but I would argue that it's one of those that have the smoothest way of integrating with Drupal. It evolved from a simple SPA, single page application builder, into something much more powerful that can handle very complex projects. But one of the challenges that we have as builders is to decide where is the dividing line between backend and frontend. We've seen it also in the previous presentation. It could be that you decide to not to take over the multilingual functionalities from Drupal and you build it only on Gatsby, but you will lose something. It's easy to overdo it on either side. So let's examine what are the roles of both Gatsby and Drupal. What is the dividing line or the shape of the coupling between these two? And in what conditions Gatsby may not be a good fit. So Gatsby, yeah, if you came here for J Gatsby, that's not the right presentation then. We talk about another great Gatsby. It's Gatsby.js. It's basically a front-end framework, a very, very fast one. It's based on React.js. It's been launched in 2016, not so long time ago, actually by our Drupal colleague, Kyle Matthews. And it's a popular project on GitHub. It's one of the most popular Jamstack projects. I'll explain what Jamstack is in the next slide. But before getting to that, if you wonder where the name comes from, just yesterday I got an answer from Kyle himself. He says it is connected to literature. He thought that Gatsby was a great name from a great book about an exciting, dynamic time in world history. That certainly makes you think about the parallels. How does the legacy web look like? What is actually the problem that we are solving here? We always have data living somewhere in a database like MySQL. We have an application that retrieves and manipulates the data and then serve it through a web server. This setup is very common, but it is a bit slow. It has many stages. It has many. It provides many opportunities for attack or a problem, and it is expensive to scale. We do it every day. It's possible, but it can be done in a more simple way. Jamstack is a web development architecture. It's based on client-side JavaScript and reusable APIs. It's built on the concept of static generators that basically take your whole site and build it as a set of static files, HTML, CSS, JS, everything you need on the front end. And that sits on a content delivery network. There are many Jamstack projects besides Gatsby. You may know Next.js, Hugo, Jekyll, Nuxt, and other ones. Yeah, so this is how it looks like. The data are retrieved from APIs. There's a build system that publishes only the static data on a CDN. This is an example from Netlify, but the scheme is generic. What are the benefits? We identified 4 areas. It's a performance, security, easier scaling, and development practice. I'll run through these very quickly. Why better performance? As we said, it's generated only once and it provides static files on CDN. What can be faster? Prefetching of linked pages is built into Drupal, so you don't have to do it yourself. The images load progressively. That saves loading time as well. The responsive image loading is another advantage. Offline access is so easy to arrange. It's a no-brainer. And in default setup, there is no extraneous code fetching. Why higher security? Well, basically, Gatsby offers you less surface areas for attack. You don't have web server, you don't have the backend exposed, and there is no involvement of database at runtime. You still have to secure your data source, for example, your Drupal. That should not be forgotten. Why is it easier to scale? Well, again, there is no database. You don't have to care about replication. It's just files that are hosted somewhere. It's a perfect scenario for serverless hosting, like S3 from Amazon. The CMS instance, because you still have to run your Drupal, can be much smaller, and that means it's more cost effective as well. In many cases, it depends on your use case, obviously. You can even switch off the CMS between builds. It really depends, what kind of website are you building. Better development practice. Why? Well, Gatsby has a long list of starters, which are kind of similar to Drupal themes. That's what I thought at the beginning, except that they offer not just the theme, but also the application itself. So it's very easy for you to start a new website of any kind. The development is more targeted. Preview of changes is really slick in Drupal. In Gatsby. Why? Because you don't even have to refresh your browser page. The changes happen immediately. It's easy to plug in a new components. Typically, we use npm for that, and updating is then also trivial. All sources can be approached using a single querying system. That's a huge advantage. There is a GraphQL language used, and there is also an IDE for GraphQL called Graphical, which is included in the local development environment. And the documentation of Gatsby is really, really, really fantastic. You should check it out. What is the complementarity between these two? So let's look, how do they couple? How tightly can they couple? So on the Drupal side, what do we expect? What definitely lies on the side of Drupal are the CMS functionalities, content management, content types, fields, taxonomy, media, importantly, Visvik, everything about editing itself, revisions, content versioning. The multilingual capabilities, as very nicely explained in the previous presentation by Nick. Slug generation, the relative URL. It's simple to do in Gatsby, but you may leverage Drupal's module path out for this, and get the information via the API, because then you benefit from other backend modules such as redirect and token. But obviously, Drupal needs its own user management and authentication. A crucial building block is the API of Drupal, and that's very efficiently solved by the excellent JSON API. And you can use other back-end modules which improve the functionality as long as they can be transferred via API. What do we expect on the side of Gatsby? Clearly the front-end, HTML generating HTML, CSS, JS fonts, and so on. The front-end caching, which is built in because it just sits on a CDN. Prefetching is there. Asset optimization for speed. Same for image optimization. So Drupal doesn't have to care for any of these. Then connecting to external sources, you don't have to connect only to Drupal. You can use a number of other CMS if you like, depending on your use case, or APIs from S3 or Google Sheets, Google Analytics. You can use all of them, and you have just one query language to query them all. Structured data annotation, it's also something you don't do in Drupal anymore. You do it in Gatsby, and it's very simple to do. Analytics, the Google Analytics was always one of the first modules we enabled in a new Drupal website. It doesn't belong there. It belongs at the front end, and it Gatsby, it's a couple of lines of code which you copy and configure. External sitemaps, the same, CAPTCHA, robots.txt, security.txt, web mentions, all search engine optimizations, all that is on Gatsby's side, and Drupal is not needed there. What is unclear or imperfect? The end user authentication in Gatsby is easy to implement, but it's more difficult to couple it with Drupal authentication if required. But maybe you don't require it, then you can solve it by using third-party authentication for both Drupal and Gatsby. There are many techniques how to achieve that. Search, again, easy to implement in Gatsby alone, but I find that Drupal's own search configuration using Search API still more superior, so there is definitely room for improvement. Preview, it's fantastic in Gatsby development. There is even a Drupal module that leverages it, but I don't think it's as seamless as in the monolithic Drupal. So this is connected with providing revisions via the Drupal API. We are getting there. Forms, by definition, require backend involvement, but that can be solved using serverless tools like those offered by Netlify. Redirect functionality, so that you don't so you keep the page, keep the link to the page even if the title changes. It's easy to do it in Gatsby, but again, it's more useful to use a backend module redirect and use it in Gatsby. This is not yet completely ready, but there are patches for the redirect module that go in that direction. They're almost ready. My experience, you see this big number. This is how long I've been busy with Drupal. When I joined, when I started with it, it was still Drupal 4.6. I've seen so many hip players coming up and vanishing again. And yeah, why would you switch to something else after 15 years? But then, yeah, no, I'm not leaving Drupal anytime soon. I think Drupal is still the best CMS out there. The CMS competition is intensifying, but still, I don't doubt that Drupal is the best choice. But Gatsby is definitely a game changer. Not just the speed, scalability, and all the pros that I mentioned. It's also modern. It's elegant. It's fresh. And it's, for me, it's also an example of a decoupled setup that has more pros than cons. Here's the discussion I mentioned. It's I'll mention the pros, the advantages, with the devil's advocate speaking in red. Performance. We can say that nothing can beat static files on a CDN. You could say that Drupal is also able to cache on CDN and expire from it, but then you have to think about the complexity of the setup. Security, you don't have to worry about Drupal, PHP, MySQL vulnerabilities because you simply don't use them at runtime. You could say that you always have security worries. You can never be completely free of them. Stability, no worries about traffic surges or DOS attacks. True, your site is replicated all around the world on a CDN, but yeah, any site can be crippled by attacks. It's fun to build. Your devs will love you, even that's not deliverable, maybe for some. Drupal can so easily connect to so many other data sources, so not just to Drupal. Okay, there are external entities available in Drupal, but again, the setup is much more complex. You have a huge access to a huge ecosystem of plugins of Gatsby, React, and JS. Do you really need it? Drupal has a lot of modules. Well, you have more quality modules in total. Then you can pick and choose even better. You have also improved access to developers. There are so many React.js developers, so you have less pressure finding Drupal talent. The access to the content is so simple using the JSON API module. There are edge cases like revisions and so on, but the JSON API module is improving constantly. The hosting is very affordable, even free on hosts like S3 or Netlify, GitHub Pages, Azure, etc. One of the ones I find particularly interesting is the Gatsby Cloud. It's because it's so streamlined for Gatsby. You should check it out. If you haven't checked, if you haven't seen Surge yet, I really recommend it. You basically build your site and then use one command to publish it in the cloud on your own domain. It's really magic. Yeah, I know Drupal can also be run on Raspberry Pi. True. Jamstack hosting companies, they have a number of extra functionalities like cookieless analytics. You don't have to worry about GDPR. There's a Gatsby cache plugin which speeds up builds considerably. Image optimization, which used to be a separate service before, it's just a plugin that is switched on Netlify. But there are many solutions which are comparably easy. What are the disadvantages or drawbacks? Every edit in Drupal requires a rebuild before it appears on the front end. It's simple to automate. It can happen immediately, but it takes time before it's built. The trigger is immediate, but the build not. There's no fine-grained invalidation like cache tags. Since this year, Gatsby offers incremental builds, but the front-end refresh remains a challenge for bigger sites over 100,000 pages. Yeah, the question is, do you need to publish everything immediately on your site? It's easy to limit access to pages, but coupling with Drupal roles and permissions is a challenge. Do you really need it, or is it just a nice to have? It's not ideal for sites that focus on authenticated users, but you can still use it on your public sites. Compared to Drupal, you will have less configuration and you have to do some coding, more coding than in Drupal. You will have to learn JavaScript as a basis, Gatsby for the concept, and GraphQL, but it's really fun and it's very clear structured. I think another drawback is that Gatsby still suffers from this stigma of a SPA, static generator, based on markdown files. It's no longer true. You're welcome to check it out. Summary. So we've seen the number of roles which are definitely on one side or the other. There is a middle which is undecided, where we still have work to do. Drupal shines not only as a CMS and an API. It's got the potential of using a lot of backend module functionalities that can be exposed through the API and very useful in Gatsby frontend. That's also one of the reasons why I find Gatsby Drupal more superior over other CMSs. Gatsby shines on a number of fronts that we mentioned. What are the disadvantages for Gatsby? Gatsby declines in advantage when you have more than 100,000 pages, even though there's been a use case also earlier today in a presentation of a site with 1 million pages. If you need immediate propagation of changes to the front end, it's also a less good fit. And if you need to focus on authenticated users, then you may want to choose the monolithic Drupal or build your own custom front end. So how does the visualization of the coupling look like? Very scientific. Look at this. Here it comes. Yeah. So I think that there's really good match between these two. There are some web resources for you to look at later, and your questions are most welcome either in this interface or on social media. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yay for Gatsby. Great stuff. So we have one question for you, Thomas, from Miro. And he says, do you have any suggestions how to replace layout builder? I guess.
Yeah, good question. I didn't mention that, but this is one of the gray areas. It should be possible to expose that expose the functionality through the API. What do you do with it on the Gatsby side is unclear. I guess if you build a Gatsby plugin that can consume the layout, it may work well, but it requires some work. It would be fantastic if that could happen. Yeah.
And would you mind showing the link and resources slide again, if we leave it on that, maybe, just for Peter there. And there was a couple of questions that Miro sent for me too. And he was just talking about the PR for the Gatsby source plugin. They're apparently having some problems. I'm not sure exactly what. But yeah, inherently what it does is it per node that it picks up from Drupal, it makes a request for every language. To the JSON API, because JSON API doesn't really provide all nodes for a given language or anything like that. So there is a sort of inherent performance problem there, but we are using it in another client site with like around 10,000 nodes and with incremental builds, which is a feature of Gatsby, and whether that's on Gatsby Cloud or hosting it elsewhere, it's all good. And yeah, there are a couple of performance things that you need to change, but generally okay. And yeah, I think that's us. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Thomas. That was great. And let's look forward to some more Gatsby presentations this DrupalCon. And yeah, enjoy yourself.
Thank you.